Okay, it's 6:15. Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me? Yes, good. Thumbs up is good. Okay, hi. My name is Dr. Jonathan Fitzgerald, and I'm an assistant professor of humanities here at Regis. And I want to welcome you to what will no doubt be a very exciting and timely discussion on the topic of aging. Though I feel like I've lived almost exclusively on Zoom these last 6 months, this is the first time that we're hosting the President's Lecture Series via Zoom, and we are just so honored to have your participation here tonight. We also hope that you'll indulge us a few tech-related mishaps that may come up along the way. Before I introduce our prestigious panel of speakers, I do need to tend to some housekeeping announcements one more time. So first, in order to receive contact hours or class credit, participants must stay until the very end, which includes the question and answer period. You won't want to miss it anyways. Participants must also hand in a completed evaluation at the end of the program to receive their contact hours or class credit. An evaluation link from SurveyMonkey will be posted in the chat box at the completion of the Q&A. Please do know that your evaluation is anonymous. We only know the names of those who have submitted an evaluation and those who have not, and then certificates will be emailed to you within a week and faculty will be notified of your attendance. If you are not requesting contact hours for or class credit, we hope you'll still fill out an evaluation form. Your input is very helpful in improving our presentations in technology and in selecting topics for future panels. All attendees have been muted so that our panelists will be readily heard. Before and during the Q&A, attendees may submit a question to Caleb Bavin in the chat room. During the Q&A, I'll read out your questions to the panelists, so there's no pressure for you to perform on Zoom. We do hope you will feel comfortable in submitting your question, as the Q&A session is often one of the highlights of the evening. Finally, please note that Regis College expressly prohibits attendees from recording and or rebroadcasting this lecture by any audio or video means. Okay, with that business out of the way, allow me a few words to sort of set the stage for tonight's discussion, and then I'll introduce our wonderful panel. So a couple of weeks ago, as I began thinking about tonight's lecture, I stumbled across an article in the New York Times written by Susan J. Douglas about Maggie Kuhn, an activist and founder of the Gray Panthers, which was a movement to encourage activism among older adults in the US. Perhaps some of you out there knew of the Gray Panthers, maybe some of you remember the group. I think in a discussion concerned with bridging the generation gap, I shouldn't be too shy to say that most of the Gray Panthers' work occurred before my time, which is to say the mid-1970s. But the 70s was, like today, a time of activism in our country. And among the causes that we might be more familiar with, like racial and gender equality in the Vietnam War, was Maggie Kuhn and her Gray Panthers, fighting for the rights of older people. And they had a lasting impact. In 1986, their work helped to get Congress to ban mandatory retirement ages for many jobs. But here's what really struck me about the Gray Panthers, as described in the Times article. They were intentionally intergenerational. Their motto was age and youth in action. They recognized that so many of the concerns that impacted older people mattered to younger people as well, if not just because young people will inevitably get older. It is this note on which Susan Douglas concludes the Times article, and I want to read you that conclusion as a way to engage our minds for this evening's discussion. Douglas writes, "The need for intergenerational alliances, not just to save Social Security, but also to achieve healthcare for all, to battle climate change, to combat race and gender-based violence, to defy ageism, and to push for a more equitable and humane economy is urgent." So with that, let's meet our panel. Our first speaker this evening is Ari McNiff-Daniels, the Senior Communications Officer for the Tufts Health Plan Foundation and Tufts Health Plan's Corporate Citizenship Program. The mission of the foundation is to improve the health and wellness of the diverse communities it serves, and its vision is to honor and support communities which are working to be great places to grow up and grow old. The foundation funds programs that move communities toward implementing age-friendly policies and practices that are relevant, inclusive, and respond to community needs. Ms. McNiff-Daniels came to the foundation from FSG, an international mission-driven consulting firm that supports leaders in creating large-scale, lasting social change, where she served as Associate Director of Strategic Communication. Prior to FSG, she spent more than a decade with the American Cancer Society in California and Massachusetts. She graduated cum laude from the Catholic University of America with a bachelor's degree in public communication. Most important and relevant to today, she is a certified facilitator, educated in 2017 on reframing aging at the Frameworks Institute in Washington, D.C. Her education, training, and 30 plus years of experience is what she brings to her presentation tonight on the reality of ageism. Welcome, Ari. Our second speaker is Cassandra Baptista. Sorry, it's Cassandra. I practiced beforehand, I still messed it up. Cassandra Baptista, the communications director for the City of Boston's Age Strong Commission, the mission of which is to enhance the lives of people over 55 with meaningful programs, resources, and connections, so together we can all live and age strong in Boston. In her role as communications director, she provides creative direction for the city's first Age Strong public awareness campaign that dispels stereotypes about aging and works with the leadership team to identify important and emerging issues within the aging field. She then guides communication strategies to support them. She's also founder and personal historian of My Day, a company dedicated to recording and preserving older adult stories. Ms. Baptista founded the company to preserve the lessons of our aging relatives so that future generations may know and feel connected to their stories. Her business has been featured in the Boston Globe, Boston Innovation, Boston Seniority Magazine, and the Danbury News Times. She earned her bachelor's degree, summa cum laude, from Emerson College with minors in publishing, marketing, and entrepreneurship, and her master's is in integrated communication, and that was in 2019. It's this diverse experience and education that she brings to the panel tonight in addressing framing social issues for societal change. Welcome, Cassie. And finally, our third speaker is Sandra Harris, state president of AARP Massachusetts, a title that she took on in January 2019 after serving on the AARP Massachusetts Executive Council in 2018 and serving as a volunteer for AARP Massachusetts for 4 years in the area of age-friendly communities and as a lead guide for Life Reimagined. Harris has significant managerial and financial experience in business, higher education, and academic health. Immediately before becoming state president, she served as principal at S. Harris Interiors, an interior design firm specializing in senior living design for 21 years. Sandra has worked extensively with the City of Boston Age Strong Commission on its age-friendly initiative and is a member of the Age-Friendly Boston Advisory Council. She's a founding member of the Boston Society of Architects Knowledge Committee on Designing for Aging, and she serves on the Community Leadership Advisory Board at Brigham and Women Hospital, the Advisory Board at St. Helene's House, and the Advisory Board of Project Q. Sandra holds a bachelor's degree in finance and accounting and a master's degree in interior design. And finally, I should note, none of our speakers tonight has declared a conflict of interest related to the panel presentation this evening, nor have we received any commercial support for the event. And with that, we will begin by hearing from Ari McNiff-Daniels, and I will share my screen so that we can get the slides up here. Bear with me for just a moment.
Isn't it awesome when technology works?
Is it working?
See your slides. That's terrific.
Great.
Thanks for that wonderful introduction and those really thoughtful words from the Times article. I'd actually love to link to that when we get wrapped up today. So good evening, everyone. Thank you all for being here. It's a strange time we live in. We are all in the Brady Bunch boxes again, but I hope you will engage. We'll have some opportunities for you to chat in not only your questions, which we really look forward to getting at the end of the presentation, but there's a couple of points during the program where we're going to ask you for your reactions to words or thoughts or images that go up there, and we hope that you'll participate and play along. We're here tonight to talk about bridging the generation gap and telling a new story about aging. And if you could go to the next slide, please. I just want to give folks a little bit of a sense of what we have in store for the evening. I'm going to talk a little bit about aging and misperceptions, and then we're going to move into the research that came from the Frameworks Institute in Washington, D.C., that why we want to tell a new story about aging and how we can go about doing that. Cassie is going to share a wonderful campaign that she worked on with the Age Strong Commission in Boston. And Sandra is going to give us some really wonderful insights from her own experience and her friends at AARP on aging successfully. We've left a solid 30 minutes for questions at the end. I encourage you to type them in as we go along or save them for the end, but please do ask questions. Next slide, please. So when I tell people that, you know, I went down to Washington and worked with the Frameworks folks to learn about reframing aging, one of the first questions folks ask is why? Why are we reframing aging? What does that even mean? And, you know, it's important to understand that demographics are changing, not only in this country, but around the world. And policies, practices, and systems that we have in place don't actually really work for the circumstances that we find ourselves in. More importantly, words really matter. And you were kind enough to share your thoughts about aging, and I'm just going to go through and read what came in through the chat. Experience, time goes by so quickly. Seasoned, getting older, less energy. Memory, wise but perhaps not as mobile. Physical and cognitive decline. Dementia, weakness, wisdom, forgetfulness. Communication, loss, wrinkles. Desire to do all that I want, but body doesn't respond. Retirement, leisure, new opportunities. Work to stay healthy and fit so I can do lots of things. Maturity, insights. Losing certain abilities, health decline, regrets. So even in those words, you can see a variety of thoughts about aging. And we're going to talk a little bit more about what I'll give you a preview. That the contrast between the words that were typed in tonight is really what Frameworks found when they did their work to understand how people in this country think about aging. We kind of hold two notions of aging at the exact same time in our brains as a society. We are seduced, if you will, by this image of leisure and retirement, those, you know, wonderful commercials for golf resorts and cruise lines. And at the very same time, in the same people, we have that thought on one side, and it's countered almost immediately by the thoughts of decline and decrepitude and deterioration. And that constant battle on the two sides is something that's really important for us to understand when we're talking to older people, because how the words that we choose to communicate can cue up certain images that are already available to them and can affect the way folks hear what we're saying. So let's go on to the next slide. This is just, it's from the Census Bureau, and this is just a really stark illustration of what we mean when we say changing demographics. You can see, you know, not that long ago in 1960, it was a pyramid. We had a strong base, more younger people at the bottom, and fewer older people. People are living longer, for the most part, healthier lives. So that pyramid has become a column. It looks very different, and it's not just in the United States. And that's important, you can see on the next slide, because if you look at when our systems were put into place, things like Social Security, which was enacted in 1935, Medicare, Medicaid. These systems were established when our longevity was in a different place, when our society had different decisions. People weren't living to 80 and 90 and 100. So there are lots of opportunities for policy changes and for advocates to be thinking about how we can rearrange our communities and our society to support older people of all ages. But we have to start by acknowledging that where we are is very different from where we were when the systems were put into place, and then think about how we can do that. Let's go to the next slide. I want to give credit. This image is from a campaign to end ageism from the city and county of San Francisco. And I also just want to take a moment to clarify, make sure we've got a clear definition. Ageism is stereotyping, prejudice, or discrimination based on someone's age. It can work toward younger people and it can work toward older people. Tonight, we're going to be mostly talking about the effects of ageism on older people. So we'll go to the next slide. So here's what the big challenge is. Misperceptions about aging and older people are pervasive. They shape our thoughts and our actions. And the part that's really challenging is people don't recognize that we have these misperceptions. They're an implicit bias. And so by definition, we're not aware that they're there. We react to things, we react to ourselves, we react to our family members based on these misperceptions. And understanding the misperceptions that are out there and what that means is particularly important when you work in an environment where you're dealing with older people. Next slide. So the World Health Organization, and the credit is on the slide, has outlined what some of these misperceptions are. And they point out that there is no typical older person. There's this misperception that all old people are this monolithic group. They're very vulnerable. You hear that word a lot. They need to be protected. You hear that a lot. The WHO also points out that expenditures on older people are an investment. Generally, when I work with folks in communities, I hear from folks who are advocating at their local government level or state level to try to get support or investments in older people programs. It's not uncommon for lawmakers to say, education for children is an investment, but if money is going to a program for older people, that's a cost. And that distinction is heard over and over. But in fact, expenditures on older populations are an investment in the whole community. And interestingly, if you really think about infrastructure, a lot of the things that we want to do for our communities that come about as a result of things that older people want really work very well for everybody and help make our communities work better for all. It's not about genetics. The social determinants of health play a very large role in how we age. And it's really important to acknowledge that, because if the focus remains on genetics and individual choices, then we lose opportunities to make improvements to our communities and our buildings and our neighborhoods that can help everybody age more successfully and more healthily. And the final point here is mandatory retirement ages do not necessarily help create jobs for youth. I have a colleague in Colorado who's done quite a bit of work on this because it's something that has become quite a hot button issue in the Denver area. I just want to point out a couple of other things that are not on the slide and not from WHO, but we hear in other environments. People perceive that aging equals decline, and there's this inevitability about that. Not necessarily the case for all people. People perceive that older people are focused on only talking about the good old days, looking backward and not looking forward. That's a misperception that allows people to be discounted. That allows organizations to think, well, I don't want somebody of that age to participate on my board because that person won't be forward thinking. There's a misperception that older people can't learn new things. Either they're not willing or they're not able. And there's a misperception about using technology. And I have caught myself doing something else that I'm going to call myself out on right now. As people in this country have a strong tendency to otherize older people. I'm going to talk about this a little later, but since I'm catching myself, I'm going to call it out. We tend to use us and them language and to create distance from ourselves and aging. And by using that kind of language in this environment, as in any environment, it creates an other class, an other group, and it allows us to minimize the contributions of the other group and remove ourselves from support for the other group. So I apologize to you that I am falling into that trap, and I will try to catch myself. I've been doing this work for a couple of years now, and I still catch myself occasionally, and it's really important for me to call it out because I should not be doing it, and I'm working. I'm a work in progress. So we'll go on to the next slide. I talked a little bit about this a minute ago, and again, just for a definition sake here about implicit bias. It means we don't know it's there. It means that our brains are going to process things in a way that we don't expect. And it means that we might do things that have no bad intention, but can actually create some barriers. And one example that I've experienced is if I accompany my uncle or my dad to a medical appointment, it's really common for the provider to direct the questions to me instead of to the patient. And again, not necessarily out of bad intent, but just this conditioning that the younger person is going to understand something better. And, I'm sure that you can imagine, particularly in my uncle's case, he was a college professor. That was really difficult for him. We developed all kinds of strategies, including me actually sitting behind him so I was out of the line of sight of the provider, so that that relationship could stay between my uncle and the patient. I was just there to be extra ears. Next slide, please. So I share this data from a survey that was done by the University of Michigan. I think it came out just about a year ago, because I think these examples are really telling. Folks were asked, people between 50 and 80 were asked what kinds of everyday ageism we are experiencing. And it really goes through everything from assuming that somebody who's older can't use a cell phone or a computer, to assuming that people who are older don't have anything valuable to contribute. And seeing it in black and white is really stark, and it's not anybody's fault. It's what's in our society. It's the cultural models that we've all been conditioned to. Next slide. So we've talked a lot about all the misperceptions that are out there. And I have to smile. Again, I want to give credit to the photo. This photo is from a campaign in Canada. I believe it was Toronto. It was a bus shelter campaign. And I just absolutely love this example as, calling out ageism and making people really kind of stop and think about what it is that they're doing when they're being ageist or anti-aging. So what's the real life impact? It's pretty easy to think about the impact of workforce discrimination and people making assumptions that older people would not be eligible for a promotion or might be eased out in some way. We talked a little bit about the limitations on older people contributing in community, serving on boards, volunteering in some way, participating even in school activities or intergenerational programming. It also has a pretty surprising to me implication for health. So Dr. Becca Levy at Yale released a study, I think it was January of this year, studying both individualized ageism and systemic ageism, and found that ageism harms older people's health globally. She identified it in 45 countries. And in the time that we're living in right now, the time of the coronavirus, the pervasive nature of ageism is really apparent. We've seen it in discussions of allocation of resources. We've seen it in conversations about protecting older people and assumptions about what older people need. So this is a really timely conversation. Next slide. So, I love this photo. The woman on the right was so excited. I handed her my cell phone and she's like, I can take a selfie and send it to my grandchildren. They always talk about selfies. I've never taken one. Required no conversation. She was ready to reach out there and press the button, and she was having a great time. It makes me smile because it's a lovely memory, but it also makes me smile because it's an intergenerational activity, and we spent the day there involved in this intergenerational activity with the folks at Two Life Communities. What we're seeing now during the pandemic is reinforcing the most damaging stereotypes about aging. This idea that there is a distinction, this reinforcement of othering, this suggestion that we literally build walls and fences to make sure that older people are separate and kept away. And, you know, what can we do that could be different, and how could we think about that in a different way? Next slide. The thing that is a little unexpected is that these assumptions about COVID and older people don't just harm and further socially isolate older people. There's also implications for younger people. So, you know, we've seen enough news reports of some of the riskier behaviors that, you know, folks are engaging in. And some of us may remember, I think it was a legislator in Texas who, you know, came out pretty early on in the pandemic and said basically that he considered himself disposable if it meant that his grandchildren would have some economic opportunities. So we've seen a lot of this language that divides the generations, and also in the beginning we saw a lot of language, and still do, that kind of gave permission to younger people to engage in behaviors because there was a perception that younger people might not be at risk or might not be as vulnerable to COVID. So thinking about our language choices and those impacts are important. There was a study that came out, I think it was last week, I saw from Columbia, that said that, I'm going to check my note because I just want to get the data. Oh, the note's not here. I'm going to go by memory. So it was a Columbia study that in New York City, the mask wearing began on April 12th. And there was a reduction in COVID transmission of about 7% overall. The reduction in transmission among people 65 plus was 20%. And the researchers took that information and hypothesized that had everybody complied with mask wearing the way people over 65 had, that there would actually have been a reduction in transmission of 32%. So by sending this message to younger people that there are some differences, you know, we're creating behaviors with consequences for all of us. Next slide, please. And I love this button from Age Friendly Ohio. And you know, this growing division, it really gives younger people permission to look at older adults as an outgroup, and it directs some anger, and you know, all of this we've seen. And what we really need to see is much more intergenerational solidarity. Fitz made the point at the beginning that the Grey Panthers movement was all about how we come together. A lot of what we talk about in Age Friendly is thinking about how communities come together, thinking about how systems can come together and work together to for the benefit of all generations. So let's go on to the next slide. Yes, good. I couldn't remember, and I don't have the slide preview on. So we have a poll that Fitz is going to put up here, and it's not a trick poll. So I'm really interested to see folks, have folks share their response. Don't overthink it, just give us a quick response. Sometimes I laugh that this poll can sometimes be an indicator of the age of the audience as much as anything else. Oh, this is great. I like this version. The polling that we use for some of our work doesn't move and doesn't give me the results. Right now, we've got 34% at 80 plus. We've got about 10% at 70 plus. Looks like 2% at 60 plus, and nobody thinks people in their 50s or 40s are old. So that's very interesting. We'll give it a couple of more minutes. So I do this poll in part because several years ago, somebody gave me a book that was supposed to be funny that said, old age is 10 years older than I am. And it does seem pretty funny, right? But there's something a little bit insidious about humor like that, about humor that you see in the birthday card aisles at a lot of the pharmacies. You know, I don't quite understand why we have funereal crepe-like drapings around 40th and 50th birthday cards. And here's, I'm gonna read a quote. This is from Frontiers in Psychology. It was published, an article was published in February 2018 about age differences in age perceptions. And what the researchers say is that older adulthood is an identity that carries significant stigma. Individuals become increasingly closer to assuming this stigmatized identity as they age. They could view themselves as becoming part of a group to which they have held negative attitudes their entire life. That motivates them to create psychological and physical distance between themselves and stigmatized outgroups. So it's that line about motivating them to create psychological and physical distance between themselves and older people, this stigmatized group. And one of the points that I want to make before we move on to the next section is this shows up in healthcare. And the way it shows up in healthcare is that older people often don't ask for help or report symptoms that we perceive as normal aging. Might be very simple symptoms, might be things like dry eye, might be insomnia, but if the patient perceives them as normal aging, there's no conversation, there's no opportunity to address it. And that's that's been consistently demonstrated, and it's a really important thing to understand that it is coming about, is that behavior is coming about from this, in part from this attempt to say, oh, that's not me. You know, if I don't have a symptom of old age, then it allows me to keep myself from feeling like I'm getting older, which is what people are inclined to do, and why the folks at Tufts Health Plan Foundation and the folks nationally working on this reframing aging initiative are trying to change the conversation to bring this out into the open and to encourage folks to acknowledge that there is a great deal of ageism and that these implications are hurting us all. Next slide, please.
Should I close the poll?
Yes, I'm sorry, thank you.
No, that's fine. And do you want to share the results?
I just closed the poll. I had more than 70% at 80 and 10% at 70, and what was it, 1 or 2% in the 60s?
Yep, 2% at 60 plus.
Sorry, good catch, thank you.
No problem.
Yeah, overwhelming, thank you. So I'm going to switch gears and we'll go right on to the next slide to talk about what reframing really means and where it came from. So I mentioned earlier that I was trained by the Frameworks Institute. Cassie was as well. And they are a nonprofit based in Washington, D.C. Their staff includes folks who are experts, PhDs in sociology, political science, anthropology, linguistics, a variety of fields. And they were asked to do this research and provide recommendations. The funding for the project really has come from all over. You can see on the slides the logos of the many funders, those who funded the initial research, which took several years to complete and involved people from across the country, and those who are funding the work, continuing to fund the work as we go forward. And we're very grateful to all of these organizations to have this research base to share and make recommendations. Next slide, please. It is important to note that Cassie and I are not employees of Frameworks. We are trained facilitators. And it is also nice to know that the folks at Frameworks were recognized with the MacArthur Genius Award. And they have done work on a variety of issues. It's not just aging. They've worked on climate change and gun control and immigration and homelessness, and the list goes on and on. So if learning more about how to communicate effectively about social issues is your jam, there's a lot of really cool information that Frameworks has out there. Next slide, please. So this project, the Reframing Aging Project, involved a variety of research methodologies, which you can see on the screen. And the sample size was just over 12,000 people. It's important to note that that group was representative of the United States population in terms of age, gender, politics, rural versus urban, whatever demographic measure you want to use. It's particularly important to note that it's a US group, that the work was conducted in English. And while there are certain trends that we can make some fair assumptions about based on other data sources like what we found from the UN from the World Health Organization earlier today, this work is very specific to the United States culture, and so want to make sure that folks understand that. Next slide. So framing is, in a way, I guess it's kind of a fancy way to talk about choices, right? It's how we present information and recognizing that how we present information affects the attitudes and understandings and even the actions of the folks we're talking to. It's the images we use. It's what we choose to leave in. It's what we might choose to leave out. The poll popped back up on my screen. So it's just a series of choices that we make when we're telling a story, when we're asking questions, when we're interacting with other folks. Next slide, please. And what the framework folks help us understand is those choices are really powerful because the words that we use can change the way people respond. And sometimes it's a very simple choice, sometimes it's a very small change. And Framework's particular expertise is in social issues framing, and those kinds of choices are really part of building a movement for change. And as we've discussed a little bit, ageism is something that is bigger than all of us. So that's why we're grateful to have this research. The next slide is an example of how this works. And as you read this, and I'll read it in a moment, but I want to point you to the bottom right side of the slide first, because as you read this, you might think that you're looking at a slide or a study that was done recently. And in fact, it was done 16 years ago in 2004. And all I'm going to say is that it makes me really sad that it is so relevant to our conversation in 2020. So the framing example here is that there's a small change, and you can see it in bold. Given the importance of free speech, would you favor allowing a hate group to hold a political rally? That framing, 85% say yes, the hate group should be able to hold a political value. Free speech is an important value. Ask people if given the risk of violence, would you favor allowing a hate group to hold a political rally? And only 40% of folks would favor that. So very small word change, offering up a different value. That's the power of framing. Next slide. And what's really important to understand is that the Frameworks folks has validated that the framing that they've shared with us about aging works. They tested it with that group of 12,000 plus people. They did person on the street interviews and a number of other ways to be able to show a change in attitude, an increase for policy support, and a decrease in implicit bias. And thinking about that, we talked about implicit bias earlier. It's back here. It's unconscious. You don't realize that it's there. So making small changes in framing that can help people get past that implicit bias is really important and key. Next slide. So our minds are not empty fish bowls. This is not profound, right? But we talked earlier, we are recognizing with this language that when we make selections and we use words, that we are communicating them to people who have other things in their minds. And so what's the impact of what is in their minds, and what is it called, what's in their minds? Let's go to the next slide. Audience participation. I'd like you to go to the chat, please. Make sure you're set to everyone. And Cassie is going to be monitoring the chat. I'd like you to tell me what you see in this photo, please. Again, don't have to think a lot. Just take a quick look at the photo and tell us what you see. And chat to everyone, please. Cassie, you're still on mute. You want to go ahead and unmute and share what we're seeing? I think you're still on mute. I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Yay, I feel like an air traffic controller. So this is my eyes on the highway right now. I'm seeing, some people are saying tire tracks in sand, got snow with tractor treads, sand, trees, sky in the background, wheelchair tracks in the sand. It's very interesting. Maybe tracks leading to a forest, sand and sky, trail to a destination. I love that. Beach, a path.
That's
tracks
awesome.
in the snow.
Oh, that's awesome.
So, good perspective.
That's awesome. So this is another one of these that it kind of depends on the audience what we get. So this is a photo of turtle tracks on the beach. Sea turtles come up on the beach, they dig a hole, they lay their eggs, and then they go back. And that's what this is a photo of. And if you could go ahead and hit to the next slide, it'll bring up the rest of the, there you go. Thank you, Fitz. So I find it a lot easier to talk about cultural models having shared that photo first, because had there been somebody on the call who was an oceanographer or somebody who maybe had been to a place where they'd spent a lot of time with Southern California, Mexico, Galapagos, I might have had somebody in the audience who would have offered up turtle tracks because that would have been part of their experience and a cultural model that they could access. Because here's how our brains work. We have been programmed through centuries, millennia of evolution to process information quickly and efficiently. And as a result, our brains take in all the information that comes at us, whether it's visual or oral or however it's heard, and we try to connect it to something that we already know. We have these shortcuts, these cognitive shortcuts. And there are dominant cultural models that are available to us. So when we hear certain words, we hook on to the dominant models, the cultural models that we've all grown up with. So in this case, we live in a state or region where you're allowed to drive on the beach. So looking at this, it's perfectly logical to say, oh, Jeep tracks on the sand. If I did this in another part of the world, I might get a completely different answer. And it's based on the cultural models. And so that's really important to understand as we think about how to work around those. A little more audience participation. Next slide, please. There'll be just one word. Thank you. Again, I'd like you to chat into everyone. Cassie's going to tell us what you're sharing with us. Instant reaction. You see the word patriot. What do you think?
Football, fighter, pride, love of country, 1776, Mel Gibson. Proud to be an American, football team, Minuteman statue. What does it really mean? A lot of football, that makes sense.
Yeah. So I sometimes, loyalty. I sometimes get Lexington and Concord. Oh, there you go.
Our forefathers, soldier.
And the other thing I sometimes hear is Patriot missile system, which I didn't hear. Let's go ahead to the next word. We've got one more word on this slide, please. And keep typing in. We've got a new word, green. Tell me instant reaction when you see the word green.
Tree, go, grass. Color, sustainability, money, new, peace. Irish, recycle, color, environmental, young, newbie, frugal. Ireland, saving environment. I'm not familiar with the Saccharocacti. Nature and experienced. Cactus.
Awesome. So the reason I do this is there are no good words and there are no bad words. We're not assigning value to words. This is just a demonstration that we all have different cultural models in our head that makes us respond to words in a certain way. So when Frameworks makes recommendations and when I share different ways to talk about aging, it's based on the idea that we don't control where our words go. And so understanding that folks have these cultural models accessible and available to them helps us think about how we might communicate in a different way. And you can see the variety. You might be saying green and thinking the color very clearly, but for somebody else it represents Ireland, spring, sustainability, or something entirely different. So just recognizing that words have that power and those different implications. Next slide, please. So how do we tell a new story about aging? Keep on going. Thank you. What Frameworks tells us is what's really important is to start with a value. We've sort of been trained to start by talking about data, and Frameworks suggests that their research shows that you want to find a point of commonality and that values are a really good way to do that. So here's an example. When we support well-being, we make sure everyone can maximize their potential and fully contribute to communities. That helps our communities thrive and remain vibrant. So we're introducing the conversation by something common. We can all get on board with maximizing everyone's potential. Next slide. And then the suggestion is to think about a way to represent what you're trying to accomplish with a metaphor, because that's how our brains like to remember things. Metaphors are very sticky. If you are thinking, uh-oh, I wasn't paying attention that week in 10th grade English, metaphor is just a way to explain something, make a comparison to something. And there's an awful lot of poetry and music and Broadway that uses metaphorical references. Couple of examples, Katy Perry, the song, Baby You're a Firework, that's a metaphor. All the World's a Stage, Shakespeare, metaphor. Maren Morris, the bones are good. She's talking metaphorically. She's not literally talking about a skeleton. She's talking about a house. There's an HGTV show, in fact, Good Bones, again, talking about a house. So it's just using one image to instantly evoke something without having to use a lot of words to explain it. So when we're talking about community and aging, there's this idea of social supports. So, you can picture a house or you can picture a table, picture the top of a table and picture the legs of the table. And, you want all of the legs or all the columns to be in place to support the building or the table. Same thing with our society. We want to have all these pieces, all these beams, all these columns in place to fully support communities as we age. And the reason this metaphor is really powerful is it allows people to think about taking coordinated collective action, and it emphasizes that this is something for society to focus on, not just for individuals. Next slide, please. And then it's really, really important if you're introducing a concern to also show solutions. The recommendation is to highlight collective solutions, to think about examples that show how community resources and social relationships interact. You know, in the pre-COVID days, one of the big examples was about safe and reliable public transportation. Right now, there's a lot of talk about solutions that are helping to get meals to folks and create opportunities for engagement among folks who might otherwise be socially isolated. So you have a value, you have a story or a way to represent what you're doing, and a solution.
All right, I wonder if it's a good idea to offer an example of how healthcare professionals can think about framing, especially in the current environment.
Thank you. That's a great idea. Let's go to the next slide and see. Awesome. We'll keep going. Thank you. So here's a reality. When we're talking about health, it's really important to keep in mind that health outcomes are not the result of individual choices. People make assumptions. If you don't fill in the story for folks, if you just say that a particular community or a community of color has higher rates of obesity or higher rates of diabetes, people are going to say, oh, that's because they made poor choices. It's really important, next slide please, to talk about, to talk about what the systemic issues are that contribute to those choices. So these are some of the questions that come to mind if we're talking about systemic issues for communities of color, for older people who are aging in communities of color or crowded urban environments. What are the systemic issues? What can we do to change? And particularly now in the time of COVID, these are particularly resonant. Now you can go to the next slide. It's really important to balance the message. We live in this world where everything is urgent in this 24-hour news cycle and everything has to be, pay attention to me now, I'm loud. But it's very hard for people to stay in a state of constant heightened urgency. It's very difficult. It makes people revert to fatalism, which is an already existing idea about aging. Oh, nothing I can do about it. I might as well just throw up my hands. So the next slide, we talk a little bit about, you know, if we're talking about a reality, nursing home populations are at high risk of being infected by COVID, congregate living, lots of things true there. But a strong infection and prevention program can protect residents and healthcare personnel. Putting a solution into that conversation, making sure that that's a part of the conversation, that it's not just about problems. Next slide. People don't consider ageism a serious issue. And particularly in these times, I want to be clear, not saying that we're talking about ageism and we're saying that all of the isms have equal weight. But intersectionality, next slide, is really important. Said earlier, older people are not a monolithic group. Lots of diversity among older generations. Important to think about how older people's race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, disability, sexual orientation, gender identity, how all of that plays in, how all of that plays into how we experience aging and ageism and what privilege we bring and what opportunities we have, and how that can play into a conversation about someone's health, about someone's opportunities to make changes to their health, and about what is available to a person because of the community that they live in. Next slide, please. And I need to move along. I'm going to show two quick examples, and then we're going to fast forward through a bunch of slides so that we can go over to Cassie. I just like to share this example because, you know, there's sort of a lot of, you know, we talked about metaphors, we talked about, you know, telling a story. This is what it can look like. And I did not write this, but it shows how, if we think about aging, we think about how unjust ageism is, and we think about how it's showing up these days, This is one way to respond. A just society strives to treat all people equally. So there's something particularly unjust about characteristics beyond our control, like age, determining whether we receive care. The AGS believes we must focus on the most relevant clinical factors for each person and case when considering how to distribute resources fairly without placing arbitrary weight on age. So that's an example of reframing the conversation that we heard an awful lot about around ventilators and PPE and limited scarce resources in a healthcare environment, to focus on how we see individual people against this reframed environment. And I think there's one more example. I think it's the next slide. Yeah, so, you know, we talked about intergenerationalism a little bit, and I like this example because I referenced at the beginning that there's been research that shows that the current environment we're living in is really pulling on the most damaging stereotypes. It's really building walls and creating division. So we have an opportunity in our conversations to emphasize the interconnectedness in our society and to point out that the virus is highly contagious. You know, that's just the fact. But when we all stay home, we see fewer cases. By keeping distance, we slow the spread. And this protects people in our communities who are most at risk and the availability of life-saving care when we need it. And what's key here is this calls out people who are most at risk. It doesn't call them out by age because we don't know what the risk factors are. There's a number of risk factors that have been identified. And it gives us an opportunity to think about folks in that way. And you will get a PDF of the presentation, so you'll be able to reflect on the other examples, and you'll see some before and after and some avoid in advance. Before I turn it over to Cassie, I just want to share one quote. It's several slides long, so I'll let Fitz go through them. It's a quote from Ashton Applewhite, and she is an activist in the aging world. There it is. I think it's a really apt way to think about it. You know, ageism is the only ism that's a prejudice against our future selves. And, you know, we've got a feeling about that. We've got research that shows that that is the case. And we have an opportunity to change the way we think, to change the way we communicate, and hopefully to change the way our society views people at different stages and ages, and looks for those intergenerational connections. And my friend and colleague Cassie has done a brilliant job of demonstrating this in the Age Strong Boston campaign, and I'm going to let her share how she's done it.
Thank you. And I just want to say I'm really grateful to be presenting with my colleagues and my friends, Ari and Sandra. So thanks for the opportunity. So if we go to the next slide, well, maybe another one, a couple others, until you see something blue. There we go. So I'm excited to share with you some of the ways Boston's Age Strong Commission has changed the frame that we use to talk about our work and also the people we serve. And we did a lot of this work over the past year. And I'm hoping you'll see some of the lessons that Ari has been walking us through at work through these campaigns. So let's get started. Next slide. So I should probably start by saying the name of our department was the Commission on Affairs of the Elderly. So not only was that a mouthful, it began to feel a little out of touch with changing language and also, you know, the new ways that we're changing and aging as people. It was our name for 50 years, so, you know, it served us well up until that point. And I do think it's important to honor what existed and what was, and also figure out a way to evolve alongside our constituents. So it was also important to us to take the time to rebrand ourselves because, you know, after 50 years, it's good to kind of pause and define and assert what we value, who we advocate for, and what we believe in, and to do that with a lot of intention. So we wanted to tell a more powerful story about what it means to age in Boston, and be intentional about what that looks like and what it sounds like. Next slide, please. So we knew, we had a feeling that, you know, we needed to change our name and our brand, but we also were hearing it from our constituents, which is important. So we were also responding to what we were hearing from folks in the city. And what we did was we surveyed people about the words they like and the words they don't like about aging. And we heard some interesting things. So one thing we heard was, I hate the term elderly. So that summed that up. But we also heard things like, I'm strong in experiences, morals, values. I like it when I'm looked on as a strong person, physically fit and mentally aware. This one quote, I just wish like I knew, it was an anonymous survey, so I don't know who this person is, but she said, I am a powerful 67 elder woman, strong, experienced, and advanced. Walk along with me. I have no fear. Like, okay, you're on another level. That's an aspirational one. But then, you know, we also heard it was a pleasure knowing someone finally gave me a chance to ask me questions about how I view myself and how, you know, how people view them, this stage of life. So that was a good exercise. We learned a lot in that process. We used what we heard to shape our brand. So next slide. So in addition to us having that feeling that our look and feel was kind of passé, and hearing from constituents, we also, you know, looked at industry research that echoed all of that. So this quote from Frameworks really steered our thinking. And it says, America needs an aging attitude adjustment. And I think that's very true. Unless the field of advocates who care about aging issues cultivate a more visible, more informed conversation on older people, it will remain difficult to advance the systemic changes needed. So, okay, I felt like we had a charge, and it was to be bold and to kind of give at least our city that aging attitude adjustment. So next slide, please. So presenting the new, next slide, Age Strong Commission. So for us, when we use the word strong, there's obviously a lot of connotations with that. For us, it comes in many different forms. So there's strength of community. Boston is a city of neighborhoods and neighbors, and there's a lot of closeness and identity with that. It's about strength of cultures, of our lived experiences, and also the strength to embrace new opportunities and possibilities and a new chapter. And we believe that older Bostonians make our city stronger and more vibrant. And so that's what we led with our branding. Next slide. And then this is one of the graphics that we rolled out when we changed our name to kind of set the stage, set the tone. And so it says, in Boston, we age strong, age with us.
And Cassie, I just want to point out that one of the things that we liked so much, I shared this at one of my Frameworks trainings because you were rolling it out around that time, and they were so excited to see the we and the us reinforced. It's so natural, but it is not necessarily, as I mentioned earlier, the way people think about aging. And this is just a lovely reinforcement of the we and the us instead of the othering and the distancing that is so common.
Thank you. Yeah, we're doing it together. And we wanted everyone to feel that. Aging, I mean, we're aging together. So next slide. And then, you know, we made this change, and it took about a year of research and planning and landing on it. And then a really exciting thing happened. We started to hear from people who had never reached out to us before. They had no interaction with us before for whatever reason. And one day I got a voicemail from someone and she said, you know, I never heard of you guys. She had a really thick Charlestown accent. I'm not going to try to do it for you guys, but I never heard of you guys before. But I read that you changed your name and that it's Age Strong, and that's me. And she was really proud of it. And she said, I'm 103. And then she hung up. And so I had this voicemail. Now she's a friend of mine, and I found a way to feature her and her story and what we came up with next. So our next slide, please. So armed with this new name and a new tone, we were ready to say something and make a big statement. And we had always known we wanted to tackle ageism, but now with the new brand, we no longer had anything that was holding us back. It would have been a little more challenging to talk to people about language changes when we hadn't done that work for ourselves yet. So we did that, and then we were ready to make a bigger statement. So next slide. So this just explains a little bit about what our goal was with designing this campaign, and also who we were trying to reach. Our goal was to challenge stereotypes about aging through print and digital advertising. And we had two audiences. So the primary audience was actually the general public. That's a big audience. It's not very targeted, but we wanted to hit as many people as possible to help them kind of identify their own implicit biases, those biases that Alri was explaining to us that are sort of like unconscious, but they pop up in a variety of ways. So that was one audience. And then, you know, the secondary one was older adults in our city, and how can we help them feel seen and feel connected to the city in a new way, and maybe more confident about their age. Sometimes when I would interview people, they were hesitant. You know, we are all hesitant, I think, in like sometimes revealing things like what's our birthday or things like that. And I was hoping we could design something that would make people feel proud to share that. So next slide. All right, so piggybacking on what frameworks told us about being bold, we knew we needed to be bold with this campaign. So here's a little bit of the strategy behind it. We identified a bunch of, unfortunately, very common stereotypes around aging, cranky being one of them. And then we found people in our community who challenged those stereotypes just by being themselves, not because they were out to, you know, defy it, but just in their normal life, how you know, we live. And they were nice enough to be our models. So we have authentic stories in these ads. We were also very conscious about making sure the people who were a part of this represented as many facets of our community as possible. So diverse backgrounds, lived experiences, even ages. I mean, the age range of our models, we had the youngest model being 59 all the way up to 103. So that was some age diversity there. And then the idea was to create some tension and a little bit of defiance and something a little unexpected to come from the city. I wanted people to kind of say, the city is saying what? They're saying cranky? Why is that on a city advertisement? Because sometimes I think there needs to be a reckoning where we confront words and biases head on and get uncomfortable and wrestle with them and you know, catch ourselves in those moments where you're like, oh, maybe I did have a thought that you know, this man Harry might have been cranky, and why is that, and let me unpack that. So that was the idea, and I'd love to read some of them for you so that you get a sense of what we were doing here. So next slide. Okay, so I'm going to make this a little larger so I could read it. Over the hill. We've definitely all heard this one, right? So over the hill, I'm in my prime. I model professionally, volunteer with my church, practice Tai Chi, and love to dance. I'm a lot of things, and over the hill isn't one of them. This is how I age strong. Her name is Smiler, 86. And then another label, maybe it's less of a label and more of like a behavior, where sometimes people will infantilize older adults or patronize a little. And so we wanted to show somebody who is a business owner. So childish, I'm a business owner, gardener, and chef. I've been cooking up Mexican cuisine at my restaurant for more than 45 years. I'm a lot of things, and childish isn't one of them. This is how I age strong. And that's Leo. Next slide. Cranky. I love my family, and I'm the life of every party. I volunteer to help others as a senior companion with the city of Boston. I'm a lot of things, and cranky isn't one of them. This is how I age strong. And then that mystery woman from my voicemail, I tracked her down, and she was nice enough to become one of the stars. So senile. You think I'm out of touch? Whatever. I use a smartphone, paint every day, play Sudoku on my tablet, and spend time with my boyfriend. I'm a lot of things, and senile isn't one of them. This is how I age strong. Irene, 103. Next slide. Frail. I'm a longtime boxer, and I can still pack a punch. I hit the heavy bag at the gym and swim laps every day. I'm a lot of things, and frail isn't one of them. This is how I age strong. Vinny. And then this lady might look familiar. Inactive. I command attention in every room I enter and look for opportunities to spark change as the state president of AARP Massachusetts. I'm a lot of things, and inactive isn't one of them. This is how I age strong. Sandra. I think we might have one more set of them. Okay, awesome. Frumpy. And I think, you know, there's a lot of synonyms for this, but, you know, questions about people's fashion choices or their relevancy, you know, so we chose frumpy. I'm a risk taker, trendsetter, and fashionista. I collect unique accessories wherever I go. My fashion philosophy is less is never more. I'm a lot of things, and frumpy isn't one of them. This is how I age strong. And Judy just retired, but I met her in the basement of City Hall, and she is always dressed fabulously, and I begged her to be in this. And then the last one is helpless. I'm an LGBT advocate and recovery activist. I lead a peer support group and keep fit by riding my bike in the city. I'm a lot of things, and helpless isn't one of them. This is how I age strong. And that's Rob. So we go to the next slide. Oh yes, so in addition to the ads, which we put in the airport, we turn them into bus shelters, bookmarks, banners, you name it. We put these ads out as much as we could. We also created this PSA. So it's a short 30-second video, and it ran on Comcast and local access television. So I'd love to play it for you.
I've been called many things.
Little old lady.
Grumpy old man.
Weak.
But you didn't think that, right?
I'm the life of everybody.
I start trends.
I'm an activist. I am in my prime.
I'm strong.
This is my Bingo Tuesday.
This is my senior moment in the city of Boston.
Awesome. Next slide. So, measuring the impact of this, there's obviously a lot of different ways to measure success. And some of the ways we did that were through views and interactions on social media. We had over 16,000 views online of our commercial. We had AARP National was kind enough to run a piece on it and make a video about what we were up to, and that got 35,000 views, which blew our minds because we didn't really have a budget for this. We just had the idea, and so it was really nice to get that kind of organic response. And we had a lot of engagement on social media of people sharing their own stories, which was really nice because as you saw, there's only 8 models who were representing the entire city, and obviously there are gaps, and we kind of wanted the public to help fill those. And so next slide. We received some great press coverage, which was very nice, very happy to have it. Boston Globe, WBZ, Rainbow Times. But if you go to the next slide, this is the kind of stuff that really excited us. So we saw a lot of intergenerational engagement and support of this campaign. And if you remember what I said our audience was, the primary audience wasn't really older Bostonians, it was everybody else. So getting everybody else to talk and feel excited about this campaign was really nice. We had young people talking about how our models were their new hashtag goals. We had millennials and Gen Z retweeting photos of our campaign, and that was cool. And then we also have people who are 55 plus saying that they felt proud to be aging in Boston, and to see, images of real people telling real stories, people who have lived complex lives that aren't one-dimensional, and not everything that people have gone through is perfect, but it's the way they embody those triumphs, and so that was the real success for me, is were those types of messages and that feedback. And so next slide. And you may recognize one of the models. Sandra shared her story with us, and was a beautiful model. And I'd love to know, what your experience was like, Sandra, being a part of this. And, I hope you had a good experience.
Well, first of all, I want you to know that I felt very good about myself and where I am in my journey in life. So it was self-affirming to know that others saw that in me as well. That in addition to knowing it for myself, I was being recognized as still bringing something to the table. Rebranding of to Age Strong was just not just a moment, it was a movement, and I was honored to have been a part of that movement. And plus we had so much fun. I was inspired by all the models, but especially by Irene, who at 103 has an 80-ish boyfriend, proving again that age is nothing but a number. So thank you, Cassie, for including me in your campaign, and thank you, Regis, for including me on this panel. Good evening, everyone. Next slide, please. I've been blessed, as you've heard in my introduction, with so many opportunities to pivot, to reset, and to reimagine my life. Starting at 19 as a tax accountant in a major corporation, moving to high-level positions in higher education, and over 20 years as a business owner, and now opportunity to work in a position that allows me to work, to do work that gladdens my soul every day. It is from these experiences and my work with Disrupt Aging at ARP that I'd like to share with you my thoughts on the path to aging successfully, a process that begins early in life. Just like universal design, aging well works for everybody, everyone of all ages. I've come to believe that aging not only provides wisdom, but also perspectives. And perspectives allow us to see the big picture and to avoid tunnel vision. So tonight, I'd like to offer my big picture and what I think are the paths that intersect at all ages and allow us all to live our best lives on our own terms. The first picture incorporates three core areas: health, wealth, and self. I propose that these are the guiding principles that show us how to embrace opportunities and change the way we think about growing old and preparing for the future. Next slide, please. I love this slide and love U.B. Blake, who was a musician and composer, who said, if I'd known I was going to live this long, I would have taken better care of myself. So as we think about health, we realize and know that we're all living longer. And the decisions that we make throughout life about our health and how we care for ourselves have a lasting influence on the quality of our lives as we grow older. Instead of merely accepting decline in health as being inevitable, then we can delay that decline through prevention, lifestyle changes, and health improvement. And I know that I'm preaching to the choir, right? So I feel that very strongly that successful aging requires us to maintain a healthy mind, body, and spirit. And we do that with proper nutrition, exercise, and staying active. We do that by finding ways to ground ourselves, to deal with the vicissitudes of life and daily living. For me, that's daily meditation and believing in something stronger than myself. Staying healthy requires us to find purpose and meaning in life. It's about having a reason to get up in the morning, becoming a part of something, our cause is greater than what we are. It's about learning something new every day. It's about committing to being a lifelong learner. Staying healthy requires maintaining meaningful connections. Keeping family and loved ones and significant others close to us. This is especially true during this crisis when we all have heightened awareness of what it feels like to be alone and socially isolated. I believe that we will survive this crisis and come out a more caring, connected society on the other side. A society that will require us to come together as a intergenerationally and to renew our social contracts, to re-examine what it means to be a good neighbor and to foster societal connections. Staying healthy requires us to spend time with people of all ages. I find as much excitement, inspiration, and knowledge from my 8-year-old grandson as I do my 95-year-old mentor. Next slide, please.
Oh, Sandra, I was just curious, you know, you were talking about social connection and we're about to launch our our Reach Out Massachusetts campaign to reduce social isolation. So I was just curious, why is that effort important to you?
Well, it's very important to me because I think, we began to look at this whole issue over a year ago and prior to COVID, because we saw that there was an epidemic of loneliness, and especially in older adults. We actually are finding and seeing that people are dying from loneliness. So we began to take a statewide view by inviting partner organizations and thought leaders in this field to come together and address this, to kind of combine our ingenuity, our resources, in a way that would make a larger impact. So, and then came COVID, and we were able to, the convergence of this pandemic with the epidemic is huge. And so we decided to really step out boldly as a state and as a leader for all other states in the country to really begin to do something about that. So we're very proud about the work that we're doing. And September 28th, which is Monday, is National Good Neighbors Day. So we are launching a hashtag ReachOutMA campaign on that day, and we're asking all base staters to reach out and do something safely make a connection, and to remember that it's just the small things that make a difference. Something like just saying hello to your neighbor, or picking up the phone and calling your mother, right? Thank you for asking about that, and I certainly hope that all of you participate in our hashtag Reach Out MA campaign. You can get more, hear more about that campaign by going to the AARP Massachusetts website. Thank you. Next slide, please.
We'll be tweeting about it for sure, Sandra. I also just want to make the observation that that's a great example of an organization and systems coming together to create conditions to support individuals, right? I mean, you talked about the importance of health and a lot of choices that people make. And, you know, the reality is that if folks want to walk and stay healthy, they need a safe, well-lit walking path. They need benches. If folks want to eat healthy foods, they need access to affordable, fresh food. And, you know, so thinking about, you know, on an individual level, whether we can do things for our neighbors to help deliver food to folks who can't drive, or on a system level, if there are community organizations that can help put together Meals on Wheels or supplement Meals on Wheels. I mean, there's always an opportunity to think about this upstream, if you will, to create the conditions so that folks have the opportunity to make those choices.
And we're also putting intergenerational lens on everything that we do, from working with school systems. And we had a wonderful project in the city of Boston where we had Boston public school students do artwork for our seniors living alone. And we had over 300 pieces of artwork that was just beautifully done and distributed and donated to older adults living alone in Boston. I think we all can relate to this next slide in wealth. If I had enough money to last me the rest of my life, I have enough money to last me the rest of my life until I buy something, right? And that's from comedian Jackie Mason. I think it's, we get so busy and our minds are so occupied with what we have to do today and tomorrow that we can't afford to think about what we're going to do in 10 to 20, 30 years, right? Especially our finances. But successful aging requires us to do what we can, requires us to begin now packing our own parachutes. And this requires financial conversations early in life. In her book, Disrupt Aging, Joanne Jenkins, who's the president of AARP, suggested 3 questions that were developed by the MIT Age Lab to help stimulate and guide these kinds of conversations. The first question is, who will change my light bulbs? Question number 2, how will I get an ice cream cone? Question number 3, who will I have lunch with? Now, as simple as these questions are, I have found them to be very stimulating and meaningful. When we look at who will change my light bulbs, it forces us to think about, where do we plan to live? How do we plan to live? And with whom we plan to live? How will I get an ice cream cone? Forces us to think about, how will we be able to afford the things that we enjoy in life? And how much will that cost? Who will I have lunch with? Who are the people that I need to be around? Where is my support network? How do I maintain that, and at what cost? A 2019 employee benefits studies that was recently done by an insurance company shows that the top 3 financial stressors were affording the cost of healthcare and retirement, outliving retirement savings, and the ability to rely on Social Security and Medicare in retirement. So what do we do about this? How do we prepare for this? What do I offer? The first thing I suggest that we really consider staying in the workplace longer. There's nothing magical about 65. We're living healthier and longer, and at 65, most of us are at our 2nd and 3rd wind, right? Staying in the workforce is not just a way to continue earning dollars, but the longer we stay in the workforce, our Social Security earnings grow. We can start benefits at 62, but it's much greater. The benefits are greater at age 70. The opportunity to share decades of experiences, mentoring, and learning from the 5 generations we now have in the workforce. I was at a workshop recently, and I heard the presenter ask a question. Why are we no longer sending, why are we no longer sending people to the moon? And of course, we all offered our ideas and suggestions of why that it did not happen again. And her response was, because after that mission, NASA retired all of the scientists and engineers involved with that mission. And I've not been able to confirm the validity of that comment or that story. But all too often we find that these are the tragic things that we find, the tragic details of ageism in the workplace. Imagine if we still had that body of knowledge, comparing that with the ingenuity and the brightness and the fearlessness that we see in all these young minds who are even a part of this conversation tonight. Imagine what kind of energy that would bring to our world. Imagine what we could do. So I think we have to really begin to think about and look for opportunities to stay and encourage employers to value older adults and keep them in the workplace longer. The other thing that we could do is to join the gig economy, become self-employed. The older adults are the fastest growing demographics as business owners. Over half of the Uber and Lyft drivers are over the age of 50. So that's something to think about. If you're tired of just going in for the day-to-day grind, then, you know, do what I did, do what a lot of people are doing. Just start your own business. Lots of opportunities there. And my last advice recognizes the tremendous wealth gap in our country and the inability for people to save for later life. At one time, financial safety networks for older adults included savings, pensions, and Social Security. Unfortunately, most people do not have adequate savings to cover retirement years. Pensions have just about disappeared for many, and far too many now, for far too many, it will now include some savings, Social Security, and Medicare to retire. According to a survey by AARP in Massachusetts alone, 45% of adults 65 count on Social Security for more than 1/2 of their family income. Another program that we are advocating and pushing in the Massachusetts legislature now is the Work and Save program. It's a program that will allow employees whose employees do not have retirement plans to make contributions from their own paychecks. They pay their own monies into a fund that allow them to move from company to company with the funds going to them, and it's reserved for retirement use. And that's something that I think that we all can get behind and begin to advocate and become energized, stay educated, and really get involved to make sure that these are the kinds of programs that are in place to help and be available for older adults as they retire. So as painful as it may be for us to really think about retirement at this age, we do not have the luxury of avoiding these conversations and delaying the process. Successful aging forces us to stay vigilant and plan for our financial security now. We must now begin our plans. Next slide, please.
Oh, and Sandra, I just wanted to say, I love what you were saying about age diversity in the workplace. I just read an article recently that said when you have diverse workforces, people are more productive, they have better performance, there's more innovation. So I totally agree with you. And I've seen it at my job right now. There's, I think the youngest staff person is 23 all the way up to 72. And it's been one of the nicest places to work because we're constantly learning from each other. So I love that point.
And you're absolutely right, Cassie. We're seeing a lot of research that's supporting that. And the other thing that we're seeing is that younger workers want to work and be around and have received that transfer of knowledge and wisdom. So I think it's a win-win for all. And I think there's a place for all of us. We just have to be vigilant and be supportive and understand the value. Thank you, Classy, for reminding me of that. And the last slide that I have is self. This quote resonates so well with me. I feel I could have written it myself. I've enjoyed every age I've been, and each has had its own individual merit. Every laugh line, every scar is a badge I wear to show I've been present. The inner rings of my personal tree trunk that I display proudly for all to see. Nowadays, I don't want a perfect face and a body. I want to wear the life I've lived. And that's Pat Benatar, songwriter and singer. So let's talk about this. Ladies and gentlemen, we have to rethink what we tell ourselves about aging. How often do we hear 60 is the new 50? Let's stand with Ari. Let's disrupt that. 60 is the new 60. That's 10 years of experience, wisdom, valleys and peaks. That's too valuable to give up. No matter our age, let's own it. And let's accept it. And let's understand that growing old is the gold, right? Let's embrace it. Let's feel good about where we are and where we're going. Aging successfully means honoring and recognizing the same in everyone and empowering others, our friends, our patients, our clients, our students, to see it in themselves. It means teaching our children and grandchildren to respect, value, and cherish older adults. Let's all be the models for successful aging, because face it, with every breath we take, we all age. I probably own every gray hair in honor of all my friends who did not live long enough to get them. And I have a story to tell for each strand. Do you have the time? At the same time, I honor all my sisters who choose to color and highlight their strains, because the beauty of successful aging is we get to choose how we want to live our best lives. So tonight, I challenge each of you, own it. Aging is so much better than an alternative. Get out there. Now is the time to start planning, to start living your best life. Come age strong with us. Thank you. Next slide, please.
Okay, well, thank you so much to all of our panelists. Fantastic presentation that really led right into each other in a really fantastic way. We are going to go to the Q&A section now, and I want to remind people, if you have a question, we've been asking that if you would find Kayla Bavin on the list of participants and send it directly to Kayla, and then she's sort of sending them on to me. And I do have a question that came in here. Here we go. That will get us started off, I believe. All right, is everybody ready? Good. Need a breather. Take a stretch. Okay, we're good. Okay, so here's the question that came in. Can you discuss strategies regarding the isolation of COVID with seniors in nursing homes, the sort of risk of COVID versus the risk of decline because of isolation?
I will get started with the conversation, but I suspect that Cassie and the work of the Age Strong Commission may have some more tactical pieces. You know, I think it's really important to acknowledge up front, there's research that shows that social isolation is the equivalent of smoking 15 cigarettes a day. That research was done before COVID. And I think that many of us who had regular work jobs or a life that involved being around other people on a daily basis are now experiencing isolation in a new way. Even if we're looking at a screen all day or working all day, I think many of us are finding out that that's not the same. And so imagine, you know, what that is like for folks who are older and don't have the same sense of purpose. So a lot of agencies are looking at ways to connect older adults to programming, to classes, to tours, thinking about ways to create a sense of purpose. I'll share a couple of examples that perhaps will inspire folks to think about things that could happen in their own community. Age Friendly Rhode Island is actually on their website has a full slate of online programming that ranges from tours of art museums to exercise classes to bridge club. It's an amazing range. Right now, it's possible for folks who are not living in Rhode Island to still access those programs, but it's just a way to connect, and we're all sort of learning through together. I'm going to stop now, and I'm going to let Sandra and Cassie chime in, because I think this is part of at the heart of the program that Sandra referred to earlier, and I'm sure that there's some things that the commission is doing that Cassie can share from the Boston perspective.
Okay, I'd like to address the loneliness issue, especially in nursing home. Is that correct? I would first like to define or tell the difference between loneliness and social isolation. Because they're used interchangeably, but they're not the same. Loneliness is when you just fail to make connections. You know, you can be in a crowded room and be lonely because you don't make a connection with a person who's in that room. So it's very subjective, you know, or you can be lonely for something or someone very specific. I was talking with my sister last night, and she misses her adult children that she's not seen because of COVID. And that's loneliness. So she's around and surrounded by a lot of people, but she's lonely. Whereas social isolation is when you just don't have that stimulation and you're not around a lot of people. You're basically alone the majority of the time, you know, your days. So I think there are a number of things, and I think it's important to understand. I find that in nursing homes, especially with my experience in working in nursing homes, that many of the people are lonely because they're wanting to be with their families and their loved ones. And although there are activities that go on all the times, you know, very active programs for these individuals, they don't participate because it's not really where they want to be, and it's not what they're searching for. It's not what they're longing for. And I think the last thing is, one of the things that we've learned from COVID is that we really have to think about how we redesigned these long-term care facilities. I think we need to look at perhaps doing more single rooms versus semi-private rooms. That's costly, but I think it's something that needs to be put on the table and discussed. We need to look at how the filtration systems and all the HVAC systems are done. So I think that we still have a lot to learn about how do we address these issues in the future.
And just to add to this, at the city level, we don't manage or oversee the nursing home system. That happens at the state. But obviously, anybody living in Boston is a concern of ours. So what I will say that when COVID first hit, we of course received many calls from people who needed access to emergency resources like food, housing, those sort of things. But at the same time, something really beautiful was happening, and we were getting tons of calls from people of all ages asking how they can play a role in reaching out to people who didn't have family nearby or friends nearby, or people who were fearful of what's been happening. So what we've been trying to do is mobilize and activate this group of hundreds of people called the city of Boston asking, is there a phone tree that I can be a part of? Is there a letter writing project I can do because I have time or I have energy and an interest in this? So what we've been doing is trying to match those people with folks who are also calling us asking if they can just chat. So sometimes we've found that someone might have called for food, but that, you know, to Sandra's point, that's not really all they were looking for. They were looking for a conversation, a connection, somebody on the other line who would take the time to talk. And so we've been working to figure out a safe way to do those matches. The other thing we've been looking at the city is the way that digital access is really it's a human rights issue. And how do we make sure that people of all ages and all backgrounds have access to technology and access to internet and access to support for those things too, so that they can reach out in the ways that a lot of people are having to lean on right now, like social media or video chatting. And I think, you know, COVID has exposed a lot of inequities that have always been there. And now that they're, you know, inescapable, I think it's leading to a lot of interesting conversations and innovations that will close those gaps. So those are some of the things we're talking about. It's obviously a huge issue, and I think it'll have to require kind of everybody at all sorts of levels to come together to try to solve it.
Thank you all for those responses. Questions are rolling in now, so it's good. I want to read a comment though that came in too that's sort of related to what we're just talking about. This is a comment from one of our participants that said, COVID-19 has targeted older adults in many ways, not only due to the risk factors and morbidity, but also in the messaging and fear factor. As someone who was approaching 60 as the pandemic hit, my anxiety level was exacerbated based on all the messaging. It made me dread turning 60 rather than celebrate. I have since tried to turn that around and recognize the positives of getting older. This is a comment that came in. And here's a question, and this is a question from a person who identifies themselves as a professor at Regis and also notes that they are aging gracefully. But as a professor of Regis, could you give me the first steps I might take to start reframing aging for our current students?
Cassie, do you want to start?
Maybe you start. I apologize. I was just responding to a message in the chat. I apologize. I've been caught.
That's okay. Real life happens. So I think that I'm going to refer back to the comment that you read about how the person who found him or herself approaching turning age 60 and activating all the cultural models around decline and being decrepit and fear and maybe this is my word, not the word in the comment, and loss. And that person was able to instead reframe for him or herself and activate the models of I have wisdom and insights. And I'm looking at Sandra as I say this because I think she is just such an amazingly graceful model of this attitude. But I have wisdom and insights and experience, and I have something to contribute. And I'm looking to find ways to do that. So that's an individual level. But as somebody who has a class of students, think about what you as an individual can do in your lessons, what you may be doing unintentionally because of implicit bias. You can go to the implicit association tests online and you can take a test and see if you have any implicit bias about aging or older people. And maybe that will be a first step for kind of learning about yourself and identifying those implicit biases. And then think about, are there things that happen in your classroom that are reinforcing this ageism? And are there opportunities to highlight, different, say it's a history or a political science program that you're talking about. Are you only ever talking about young people and people who are activists in that cohort? Are you also showing examples of older people? Those seem to be some of the good first places to start. Sandra, Cassie?
I would also like to say that there are many curriculums that are coming up in age-friendly universities where they're actually developing programs and curricula around aging, where volunteers in some cases or even professors are teaching, talking about or having students understand what's really happening as a person age, and also sharing the fact that, you know, aging is, everyone ages, and we start, as I said earlier, our very beginning. And I think if we can begin educating young people to the aging process, even the deficits associated with aging, as we sometimes like to think about it, at an earlier age, they have a better appreciation and a better understanding of even how it relates. We have, ARP has this wonderful video in which is asked young people, how old is old, very much as you're polled, and they introduce these to these age or older adults who can do all these wonderful things, and the students can't do them. They try to learn and they can't do it. But I think that there are opportunities where we can even invite people, gerontologists or geriatric people who work in the geriatrics field, to classrooms and just talk about and to share what's really going on and how people are aging and aging well. One of the things that we find exciting that's coming as a result of this is that we're getting more students interested in the areas of geriatrics and gerontology. And that's a field that we desperately need more entry.
And something else just to add, our partners over at UMass Boston helped us actually create a companion piece to the ad campaign I shared with you all today that is a lesson plan and is a lecture, and depending on how much time a professor has to add it to the curriculum, it could expand. We could fill a whole week if you had it. Obviously, we have a lot of content, or it could be trimmed down to fit in with a lesson plan that already exists. It's not something that we have launched yet, but if anybody on this call is interested in using it and integrating it into the curriculum, I'd be happy to share it with you.
Awesome, thank you. And related to that, we do have a comment that came in from our own Kayla Bavin, who is in the online Masters in Health Administration program here at Regis. And she notes that she's taking a gerontology ageism course at Regis this semester, and it's been an amazing experience. She says that she's learned so much about stigma and has new perspectives on aging as a whole. So there it is, working in the process. That's awesome. Let's go to another question, if you don't mind. Let's see. So when you are reframing aging and talking about that with people, do you encounter ideas and or stereotypes that are so ingrained in the populations that you serve, older adults, that you find yourself actually needing to help them reframe their own view of themselves? So this reframing, is it happening, sort of to the population in general about the way that they look at older adults, or is the reframing actually needing to happen within the populations you serve as well?
Yes, both, all.
Yes.
I will say it is in the general population, as documented by frameworks. It is older adults ourselves, as we've seen examples of medical and the Frontiers in Psychology article, and it is in organizations that serve older people. I think it was Cassie that made reference to paternalistic attitudes, or yes dear, or yes sweetie, and that sort of thing. I mean, it's just so embedded in our culture, and it's really very hard to navigate the conversation sometimes, because and that's why frameworks narrative model is helpful, because you can't hit people over the head with facts. You have to help folks come to this understanding of the conversation. And, Frameworks recommends that the entry point is to find a common value. Don't we want to live in a place where everybody can maximize their potential? Don't we want a society that treats everybody justly and fairly, regardless of their age? So those kinds of introductory statements are sometimes helpful, particularly in organizations that serve older adults or people who work directly with older adults who have been educated and find it very hard to hear that this new research suggests that ingrained habits could in fact be harmful. That has to be handled very delicately, and those value statements can be helpful in navigating that space.
Okay, awesome, thank you. Let's take another question. So this is a sort of distillation of a question that came in. We've heard a few preferred terms being sort of used. Is there a single preferred term that we should be using? This is, I think, a really good question. What's the preferred term? What's the language we should be using here?
Can we pop back to the slide deck? There's actually a slide with 2 lines on it. It's got a green panel on the left. It's between where I ended and Cassie began.
Yes, let me try.
It's a note on naming, I think.
Okay, this is gonna be tricky. Let me see if I can get
Okay, if we can't, I'll try to explain it. So Frameworks did some research on this, and what they did was they put out a poll. Oh, look at this! We're testing the technology and it's working. Oh, you're perfect. Thank you. So they polled people, and they asked people to rank these words on a scale of least competent to most competent. And I see there's something funky going on with the far left word. The far left word should in fact be elderly. So my apologies for that. So general population said that the least competent, the word that evokes the least competence is elderly, and the words that evoke the most competence are older adults. That same group was then asked to tell the researchers how old the people in this general description is. And you can see that older adults are about 54 according to this sample, but older people are about 65. So at the foundation, and many of my colleagues in other fields have landed on the language older people because we want to evoke people who are competent and in their 60s for most of the cases, 60s and older, I should say, for most of the work that we do. The one really important caveat to this is, and again, typo on the slide, I apologize, the word elder in many communities is a term of reverence and respect and is considered competent, beyond competent. It's an ultimate compliment. So you all know your communities best. This research reflects that the word elderly in the general population evokes this suggestion of folks being less competent. But it is really important to note there, in indigenous cultures and Black and African American communities and Latino community and Asian communities, we hear over and over again that the word elder is an honorific. And so I don't want that to be misheard and for folks to think that they ought not to be using it. But that's why we use older people, because we're trying to suggest that we're dealing with folks 60, 65 plus who are competent. Cassie, do you have any thoughts on that? Because I know that you did a lot with words around H strong.
Yeah, I would say the biggest takeaway I had from that experience of surveying people and then trying to line up a word or name that made sense for us is to constantly stay open to the fact that things will change, and that what's true today about how we feel about certain words is true today. And, as we learn more, it might mean that there will be a new set of guidance or insights that we have to adapt to and learn from and take in. And so something that I talked to my commissioner about was that, the original name, for example, Commission on Affairs of the Elderly, which lasted for 50 years. I don't know that like our new name, Age Strong, is designed necessarily to be the name for another 50 years. Certainly would be great if it held true and was still relevant to people for that long. But I think sometimes the words we use serve a purpose in that moment in time and help us, tell the story that we're trying to tell in that moment. But maybe there's going to be, for example, we said Age Strong as a response to so much messaging that talks negatively about aging. So we kind of swung the pendulum a little bit to be really purposeful about saying something more positive. It could be in 10 years that we don't have to make that case in that way, and that the way we look at aging would be more, holistic. And we don't have to talk about it in terms of like, this like black and white, and we can just, maybe there will be a new phrase that makes sense then. So I guess I just wanted to share that I think it'll constantly evolve as our language evolves.
Great. I'm going to stop the share again here so we can see each other. Okay, here's another question. Someone's asking if you think that there'll be, are you anticipating a great sort of lack of availability in long-term care facilities or home care with the aging baby boomer population? Does that enter into your sphere, into your work at all?
Is that for me?
Oh, for anyone.
I don't know if I have an answer for that. It might be a little bit outside of my wheelhouse.
Okay, no problem.
I would like to say that I don't think so, because I think what we're finding is that people want to live at home, to age at home. People do not want to go to facilities, including a sleep. There's a real concern, and certainly I think nursing homes will no longer be as popular, prevalent as they are now. We're finding that there's a change of resources, and programs are beginning to offer more community-based programs. Programs like PACE is becoming very popular, where there is a facility in the community where people live, allowing people to stay at age. Of course, if you look at a place like Boston, that's a particular problem, because when our traditional housing stock does not allow people to always age in place, right, with steep staircases and the condos. So that's going to be a challenge. But we're finding, and trends are showing, that people want to live at home, and we will have to begin providing opportunities for people to age. I don't say in place, we say age in motion now, but allow people to age outside of facilities because they no longer want to go there.
It's fantastic. Thank you so much. Well, we've hit the bottom of the question bin, so I think that ends the Q&A. What a fantastic evening this has been, and I hope that all the sort of attendees here will join me in thanking our panelists for the evening. Some people are cleverly using the hand clapping emoji that you can use here in Zoom. Indeed. Thanks to each of you, to Alri, to Cassie, to Sandra. Thank you for being with us tonight. And thank you to everybody who is here joining us in this sort of most different of presidential lecture series, but I think no major technological faux pas, so I think we're in good shape. So we are going to now post the evaluation link in the chat box there. I will also post a link to the slides, which our panelists are very generously offering for you to check out. A reminder that the evaluation is due, for those who have to fill that out, is due by 10 p.m. tonight, at which time the link will be closed. So I want to encourage you to keep an eye out for our next President Lecture Series discussion, which you'll be hearing about very soon. And join me again in thanking our panelists. And thank you for joining us.
Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.